Until now, there's been very little research on youth involvement in minority or regional European languages. But we know that youths or teenagers are important and influential players in both language preservation and in language decline. Now, I'm not sure what you think, but I suppose when I've been trying to grapple with this, I think one of the main reasons why youths haven't previously really been subjects of any major studies within the field of minority or regional European languages is perhaps because the traditional academic approaches have foregrounded childhood rather than youth. And until secondary school education was made compulsory throughout Europe at different periods in the 20th century, histories and linguistic interests of young people between the ages of 12 and 19 have been difficult to narrate due to the diverse individual, social, and environmental circumstances. So we're now in a position, I think, to start to study youth, and this conference will hopefully be a step in the right direction. So some practicalities maybe now regarding this conference. So there's going to be 4 languages used during the conference: English, obviously, Irish, Welsh, and Catalan. And there's going to be interpreters working with us. So please note that we may get lost in translation from time to time, and that in the spirit of exchange, we ask that you all be patient with each other when we come together in this space of learning. So these things do happen. Thanks to our sponsor, the European Research Council, without whom this conference would not be happening. Also to say that the conference is a joint effort between the School of Irish, Celtic Studies and Folklore in University College Dublin and also the Department of Welsh at Swansea University. The conference committee, who you will meet during the course, you'll meet everyone during the course of the conference. So they are Richard Huddleston, Fiona Lyons, Moira McCafferty, Owen McAvoy, and myself, Ríona. We're all based in University College Dublin. And our Welsh representative, who is Hannah Sands, and she is based in Swansea. You'll find us on Twitter. And if you have any issues, you can email our email account. You should have the details soon as you've registered. You can email us during the conference. So we're going to start out with a really exciting talk. I'm going to speak about the speaker in 1 minute, but just again, a few things about individual sessions. So just to remind you all to turn off your microphones. And at the end of the sessions, you will be able to ask questions. This talk is going to be in English. Other talks will be in Welsh, Irish, and Catalan. If the talk is in a language other than English, you'll see a little button at the bottom of your screen that you'll be able to press in order to get an English language translation. And also this talk is going to be recorded, so just to be aware of that. So I'm really excited about this first speaker because she's got a huge amount of experience in the field that we're dealing with in this conference. Her name is Nicole Dołowy-Rybińska, and she is a sociolinguist and expert in cultural studies at the Polish Academy of Sciences in its Institute of Slavic Studies. Nicole has published a number of monographs in Polish and English on language rights and revitalization, minoritized identities and multilingualism, focusing particularly on the Kashubians of Pomerano and the Sorbs of Lusatia in eastern Germany and western Poland. So the title of her talk is Language and Cultural Trajectories of Young People Becoming Engaged in Minority Language Issues. And I'm going to hand over to Nicole now. Nicole.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I'm really honored to be here with you and to open this fantastic conference with my talk. I will just share my screen with you. My presentation concerns language and cultural trajectories of young people becoming engaged in minority language issues. And it is based on a long-term and quite multi-phased research that I conducted over the last 15 years or something. The main data I will present and discuss today are coming from the research project I conducted between 2011 and 2014. And it was about minority language, young activism, or people who are becoming active in minority language issues. The results of this project I presented in the book. You can see the cover here. No one will do it for us. It was published in English in 2020. But even if this research dates from a few years ago now, after I was involved in different projects concerning becoming new speakers of different minority languages, and also in revitalization of Sorbian languages project. And it was also a lot about activism, and also with connection with young people. So I could say that the conclusions are still up to date. Maybe now I will just tell you a few words about the project. So it was conducted in 4 different places around Europe: in Kaszubia in north of Poland, Upper Lusatia, so about the Upper Sorbian community in Germany, in Wales, and in Brittany, France. It was based on participant observation of language and cultural practices of young people. And these young people who were the participants of this research were on different levels, different stages of being involved, engaged in minority language issues. Among them, there were people who were learning the language, who did participate in minority languages demonstrations or campaignings, who were active in students' organizations, who were members of the groups of promoting minority languages, who did actively participate in minority language-oriented artistic activities, or were involved in minority language media, who were members of non-governmental or even political organizations, who did participate or were organizing civil disobedience activities, and many other forms of participation. With these people, I recorded over 100 in-depth interviews, so more than 25 interviews per area, with the objective of this research to define these young people language and cultural practices, and also attitudes toward a minority culture and language, but also to understand their motivations, and most of all, the strategies for involving themselves on behalf of their communities. What I found important is, although belonging to so different communities in terms of the level of language endangerment, of the status of the language, of the number and, I would say, types of minority language speakers, and in many other different areas, it was still possible to identify the common trajectories in becoming a minority language activism. And this is the basis of my talk today. I use the concept of language and cultural trajectories, referring to Jean Pujolar's notion of linguistic moods, so the specific biographical junctures where individuals enact significant changes in their linguistic repertoire. Obviously, becoming a minority language activism is something more or something different than changing linguistic repertoire, even if it both go hand in hand together. I would rather say that the linguistic repertoire of these young people did change as a result of their gradual involvement in minority language issues. There is another important aspect of this research and of this research participants. It is about the speakerness. What is really what I found interesting and important in this research is that among people I observed and did interviews with, there were people of different kinds of speakers among them. There were those who were born in a minority language speaking families, for whom a minority language was the first language and the main language of contact with other people. There were those who had some access to minority language through their families, but it was not a dominant language for them. and it was not the language they were using in their everyday life, so they had to make an effort to use it. There were those who were learning the language in bilingual or immersion schools. They were those who decided to learn the language when adults and often struggling with this barrier in starting to speak the language. They were those who constantly did practice minority language, but also those who did not have the productive competences in a minority language, but could understand something in this language, and they did make an effort to become active speakers of this language. So also to repeat, different kind of speakers were among these young people I spoke with. My research participants were in the age of 16 to 25 years old, and obviously these boundaries, these age boundaries, were set arbitrarily. What I wanted to achieve is to have participants, on the one hand, mature enough to be conscious of the choices they were making or they were about to make, and on the other hand, who were still in the age when they can choose the activities that are enjoyable for them and that really shape their characters, and also that are in the age where their relation with other people are being created or being established. Obviously, young people think and act a little bit differently than the adults who have different responsibilities and are also in the whole network of dependencies. They've got their families, stable jobs, they need to earn money, and so on and so forth. So we can say that young people are more free and spontaneous in their actions, and also that they are, let's say, more open to take a risk in their activities. And all this makes that these people's engagement ideas that sometimes goes against these ideas of older minority language activism, and also their enthusiasm plays a really important role in any language movement in all these places, but I would say also in any movement at all. I divided the trajectories of young people becoming engaged in minority language issues in three main categories: participation, engagement, and activism. And I will briefly define all these stages, illustrating them with the narratives of young people I interviewed. So the first category would be participation, and participation as such may have at least two dimensions. I will talk about it here and also after when discussing engagement. So first of all, this is the way children and young people are familiarized and brought up in a minority culture and also in a linguistic environment. It is somehow unconscious way that makes these young people's life a little bit different than those of their peers, whose parents and also environment do not really identify with a minority language culture. So this is something they are just living in. And this aspect of belonging to a minority community is often and also often for a long time unrecognized as something special by my interlocutors. It is just a part of their life. And this is what 21 years old man from Kashubia told me. And I will just add that as you can see, the symbol 21 would be the age of a person, M would be man, and F would be woman, K Kashubian, S Sorbian, W Welsh, and B Breton. So he said, I suppose at home we didn't have this idea that something was Kashubian, but there were many natural things, except we didn't realize that we were doing them. So a minority culture and participation in it as something natural, as something unconscious. It is also something that was stressed by 25-year-old Breton women who were referring to participating in the festnos. And she said she would not call it a cultural activity, singing, dancing, drinking beer at festnos. Well, it's not cultural activity. And here I would say that there are these two dimensions of unconscious participation and something that is being step by step getting more conscious, or people are being more aware that the participation in a minority culture and in minority language-oriented activities is something that differentiates them from another, from people who do not identify with a minority language culture. And here are the words of 21-year-old woman from Lusatia who described this like this. Subconsciously, when someone thinks, I like dancing, so I will join a dance group, but the dance group wears costumes, evangelical or Catholic. It's something Sorbian. So I think that it is subconscious that by joining such a group, the person supports tradition and culture and follows customs. So at the moment, this participation gets this dimension of consciousness that what people are doing is something connected with a minority culture. It is also the moment of creating the boundaries, according to this famous definition of ethnic boundaries by Barth, that it is through differentiating people from one group through another, and it is also about becoming conscious about being a member of a minority culture. So active participation may lead to engagement as it brings about a certain consciousness of being a part of the group. It is linked with the identity, with the sense of membership, doing something with other people and something connected with a minority culture. And it also gives motivation for doing something about a minority language or connected with a minority language. So because of being a member of a group and also the agent of activity, a person becomes conscious part of a community, and it makes also people being more engaged in a minority language activities issues. So engagement is a form of an active, creative, and conscious membership in minority life. So there are, of course, different stimuli becoming engaged in minority language and cultural issues. Basing on the words of young minority language activists or people engaged in minority language issues, I managed to identify the few most important and most often repeatable trajectories, this kind of nodal points in becoming engaged in minority language issues. What is important here is that almost and practically all these nodal points are interconnected and they influence one another, creating all this background for a young person to become more and more engaged in minority language issues. So obviously the first the most important nodal point is parents and family. And obviously this is where a young person is socialized in a minority language, culture, and environment. This is where all kind of values are being transmitted, where a person learn the habits, and also where the language is being transmitted. What is important, it is that it is not only about the language itself. So it is not only about the families who speak, who use minority language in their everyday life, and where the language, the main language of the family is a minority language, but it is also about the attitudes toward a minority language. It is about whether parents who do not speak the language or for whom it is not the main language of communication decide to send their children to minority language schools to show them different ways of living through minority culture or send them for different kind of extracurricular activities. And here I would like to quote two young men, one from Lusatia and the second from Wales, whose family and parents give them somehow different sense of belonging and this background to be engaged in a minority language or cultural issues. The first words are of 22 years old Sorb, who said, I grew up with it. Our dad was always telling us where things were in Lusatia. We always went to different places to look at everything. Whenever a commemorative plaque was unveiled in a village, we were there. I really think it's good that we did it. I'm grateful for it. For years, every Christmas, we were given Sorbian books. We got them whether we wanted them or not, and then we read them. Our parents paid close attention that we did. So this is kind of socialization with a minority language, showing the children that it is a part of their life and that it is important. And a different kind of socialization to become engaged in a minority language and cultural issues comes from 20 years old Welshman who said, I think my engagement started because of my uncle. He was very sensitive to this because he was actually arrested in 1980s for protesting for a better status of the Welsh language. And he spent some time in jail. So it passed on to me through family more than anything. I think I was just born in it. It's developed in me with time. It's always been there since I was little. Everyone wears Cantatas Iriad t-shirts, stickers. It was always there. I just accepted it even before I actually understood why. So what we've got here is like two different types of engagement of these young minority members' families. One that was putting special attention on the cultural issues and like strengthening cultural links with a person, with this a child, a young person, and a minority culture, and the other who gave the sense of political involvement. The second nodal point can be identified, I did identify as a school. And obviously the role of a school in becoming involved in anything is very much complicated. Of course, on the one hand, it may be a place, especially for those who are not from minority language speaking families, where a young person have their first contact with a minority language and intensive contact with it. When they meet other speakers or potential speakers or future speakers of the language, where they can establish relations also with their peers whose parents may be somehow involved in minority language issues. So also give them this influence of participating. This is where young people may start to participate in different forms of activities, including communities of practice. I will say a little bit more about it later on. But on the other hand, the school may be also the place which may ultimately discourage a person to have anything to do with the minority cultural issues or with the use of the language. It may create a blockage in this willingness to be a part of or a conscious part of a minority language community. So here I would like to stress some positive aspects of the school with a very important role of teachers, of different activities proposed by the school or around the school, and also by people met at school. And here, of course, it is about the peers, the schoolmates, but also other people that may influence young people, like school animator staff and so on and so forth. And I will quote the words of a Welshman who did stress a very important role of his school teacher in his being engaged in minority language issues. He said, yes, it started in secondary school. It was not the curriculum really, it was the teacher who wanted to introduce us. We've learned about the history of Wales and the conflict with English people. We've learned about the Welsh-speaking Wales, and I really wanted to see it, how it is outside of Cardiff. It was the interview was in Cardiff, and he was living in Cardiff. It was definitely in school that it started. It wasn't a family thing. And since then, I got involved in stuff like Cymru or and Cymdeithas Iriad. And the other also point that connects somehow and often school with other activities that are outside or around the school, I called the cultural activities, which may also give the sense of engagement for minority issues. And here I did say at the beginning about the participation, but the stage which is rather unconscious. And here I'm talking rather about this conscious participation that may lead to deeper engagement. So by joining cultural activities, young people also may form the bonds between each other, may learn the language or learn some activities, how to be together in this activity and gain social and cultural capital. Here I would refer to the communities of practice, the definition created by Venger. So the extracurricular activities at school or outside of the school encourage young people to form this kind of communities of practice, which provide further opportunities to learn the language, to develop community skills, to share practices, and also that shape their identities through this common engagement and through the bonds with other people who are also engaged in this activity. And I will quote a 25 years old Kashubian woman who also was talking about the community of practice she participated in, so the amateur theater in Kashubian language, but it also links this point, cultural activities, with the school, because the theater and all this was the idea of her Kashubian language teacher. So she said, if not for my secondary school, I wouldn't even know how to write in Kashubian, because you know, at home we spoke Kashubian, but then my parents cannot write in this language at all. Also, taking part in performances of this amateur theater run by Kashubian teacher enabled me to get to know Kashubian literature. You know, during regular classes, there is never enough time to learn everything. But while preparing for a performance, you need to get familiar with the writer, the author, and the whole context in which a story, a tale, or a drama has been created. So one thing, it is this sense of interest, of being engaged, but also what is important in many cases, it is through this kind of communities of practice that people, especially those who did not have minority language as their family language, get this sense of being able to use the language, because a minority language becomes their language in which they want to share and which they want to use. So another novel points are friends, and obviously it is all very interconnected, because most young people get their friends and establish friendships at school or through extracurricular activities. And here are the words of 18 years old Sorbian girl who said, I have a very good friend who is heavily engaged. She has this ability to motivate people, and she does a lot for young people from the village. She tries to introduce them to Serbian culture. Every now and again, she organizes trips to Serbian theater for performances in Serbian. When PAUK, so Serbian Youth Association, was organizing a Serbian festival, she said, come on, we'll go. She wants young people to do things which are truly Serbian. She was my inspiration. So this young girl with whom I recorded this interview was really pushed into action through or by her best friend, who was already engaged in organizing things in the minority language and in cultural issues. And another point, I said that it is by chance or coincidence, but obviously this is the stage or the sphere that is very deeply combined with a certain grounding, the grounding provided by family, school, peers, and other important person in the life of these young people. So when they have all this grounding, and there is a bigger possibility that being in the right place and the right time, they will catch this willingness to engage, like this 21 years old Breton woman said. During holidays, I went to many festivals, and one was organized by the AITA collective of civil disobedience. The collective fights for Breton to be an official language. I went along, signed up, gave my address, and that's how it started. Then I spoke to a few people from the collective. There was a campaign, we went, I met people, and that was the start. Then I became involved as much as time, place, and other things allowed. I really wanted to join in. So she was ready to do it, but she needed this impulse to start being actively involved. Well, the other moods I identified, those that did repeat more often, was parting from one's family and location. It was especially for those who were at the age of studies, so like 19, 24 years old, that it was through distance that they felt that they lost something important, or how important a minority language was for them, and when they came back, they wanted to do something about it, to be more engaged. It was also often about losing someone important, most often one of grandparents, a grandparent that was this carrier for like a minority heritage, whether the language or culture or the link with the culture, and the loss of this person made these people realize that they have to engage more. So engagement in a minority language issues is obviously beneficial for a community, but from the point of view of young people, we can also discuss it through this term of pride and profit by Monika Heller and Alexandre Duchesne. So on the one hand, there are different profits for these people. They are developing different skills, like being able to present things or organize money or be involved, etc. But what is important is also what is in the term of their identity, so this pride of creating deeper relation with the community, with other people, but also finding one's own place in the world. So the feeling of doing something that is important and something that make their life more valuable. And all this makes that engagement often result in becoming active. Obviously, this becoming active or becoming activist is also related with getting awareness about the minority situation or minoritized situation of community or language, of this language endangerment, of discrimination or different form of discrimination against the community, against the language, of the need to protect and to develop minority culture and language that is not that obvious as when a language is not minoritized. and also of the responsibility of every conscious person, of every person that is a part of the community. So in that way, engagement often results in becoming activism. So activism is frequently defined as intentional, vigorous, or energetic action that individuals and groups practice to bring about a desired goal. For some, activism is a theoretically or ideologically focused project intended to affect a perceived need for political or social change. So this is the definition. And what is important is that for minority communities, the role of activists is much bigger, it's much higher than the role of activists in the communities who have very strong institution and political leverage. Here, these are the activists who have to somehow fight for minority language rights, for the respect of these rights, and for this ability to use a minority language. So activism may need to be noisy in order to be heard, but it also may take more quiet, more personal forms. And it all depends on a person or of a community, of the situation of a minority language. Activism may be the decision itself to learn and to use a minority language, particularly when it is not well seen by the community at large. It may be related to promotion of minority culture or creation in a minority language, but it also may take the forms of campaigning, of direct actions, or political engagement. And I would like to go through these three different aspects of minority language activism. So first, the language use, that even the knowledge of the language or getting to know the language becomes a kind of obligation to do something about it. And here I would like to quote a very young 16 years old Breton girl who was a student in D1 Immersion High School. She said, "If I speak Breton, I cannot keep it just to myself. It would make no sense to know the language and do nothing about it. If I speak Breton, I would like that something comes from it. I would like to be inside of it, to create some project, some activities on behalf of this language. Only then it makes sense." So it is the knowledge of a minority language that is already the responsibility for this language and a kind of obligation to spread it, to also to increase the usage of this language, not only in the very narrow community, but also with other people. Another form of activism, I would call it is about organizing different cultural or linguistic activities. So those activities that may give the sense or the willingness to participate in a minority culture to other people. And here are the words of 25 years old Sorbian girl who said, "Thanks to PAUK, the Sorbian Youth Association, young people have an opportunity to get to know the young people from other villages and to take part in events. We tried to do some modern projects which attract young people, obviously everything in Sorbian. We tried to make them understand that what is in Sorbian is not necessarily silly, serious, or traditional. It is not about literature, about culture, but the point is to do cool things together." And here, obviously, what is interesting is the way this girl defines the project typically related to minority languages or participation in a minority culture that she defined as silly, serious, or traditional. And I would say that the role of young minority language activists is also about the fact that they know what is important and what their peers like, and this is about this creating cool things together, something that is attractive also for young people they know. And finally, there are direct actions, and this is something that is really deeply connected with the way the direct actions or the campaigning are provided in a particular community. So it would be different in Wales, it would be different in Lusatia, because this is the way of doing things. But here I would quote the words of a young Welsh man who is talking about his becoming engaged in language activism. And this is what he said. I know there are different types of people. Some people like lobbying and sending letters, and other people like to campaign. I like to campaign. It started when I was in the sixth form. There was always too few of us who choose to do the minimum in Welsh. And it made me think that it wasn't right, that I have to defend it. I joined Trajectories, the Welsh Language Society, and I decided I had to do something. In my village, everything is monolingual, English only, and that's not right. I contacted the person responsible, but nothing changed. We only heard some excuses. We sent many letters, made a lot of phone calls, no reaction. So we decided to take matters into our own hands, and we bought some spray cans. When I sprayed the signs, they installed bilingual ones. It was the first thing I did myself after becoming a Trajectories member. So this is really the whole path of becoming a minority language activism, from getting awareness that it is about the situation of a minority language, that it was not used in a bilingual school, or that it was not exposed in the village which was supposed to be bilingual, through the decision to do something about it. So try to contact the people responsible and change the situation, to the direct action that may also be successful, as it was in this case. So to conclude, what I intended to present here is that the form of language and cultural engagement in minority issues, so participation, engagement, and activism, form a kind of self-fueling machine, but a machine that is losing some participants in each of the stages. Only in some cases, participation will lead to engagement on behalf of minority languages and culture. Engagement may, but does not have to turn into activism. And activism, this is where different activities for those who may start to participate in a minority culture are being created. So this losing people on each step of becoming engaged in minority culture is obviously not surprising. It is also not undesirable. Not all minority groups members have to be actively engaged. The role of language activism is to increase people's consciousness, is to struggle for language rights and their respecting on different levels, and to create opportunities for other people to get involved. And before I finish, I would like just to say that it's been a few years now that the project is finished, and I'm in contact in some of people with whom I conducted interviews, and I did participate in many different activities with them. Some of them are not at all involved any longer in any kind of activities toward minority languages. Some of them left their regions and do not use minority language in their everyday lives. But there are also many who are still involved in a minority language issues as parents, who are giving the sense of speaking the language, or having this pleasure to use the language among them, as teachers who are inspiring other people, their students, to get involved, as animators who are organizing different types of activities, or who are leading different forms of communities of practice in which young people participate. as local politicians who try at least to secure interests of their groups. And finally, of those working in minority language media and those working in minority language institutions and who are responsible for more stable programs on behalf of minority languages and cultures. In many cases, this program, the next programs, the next generation of young people who are becoming activists will revolt and propose their new ideas. Goramatagat, thank you very much for your attention.